Okay, thank you to the forum for having me. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Unfortunately, I may not be able to stay for the entire duration, but you know, I do welcome any engagement, and I know that Kate Metse is here as well in the meeting. So if there's anything that you'd like to discuss, we can always do that at a later time. So the theme that we're looking at, given that it's February Wetlands Month, apart from just World Wetlands Day on the 2nd of Feb, is really to create awareness and increase our understanding around the critical importance of these wetland ecosystems. And so in keeping with this theme, I'd like to just touch on the department's work and the perspective with regards to the wetland restoration. So I'm going to touch on a few themes rather than just have one or two slides that talk to it. And the themes are really around wetlands and their value and how we perceive their value, the state of wetlands in South Africa, and then also looking at some of the work that the Working for Wetlands program is doing in terms of wetland rehabilitation and restoration. So wetlands are our ecological assets, otherwise sometimes referred to as ecological infrastructure, and they seek to provide nature-based solutions to some of society's problems. So in trying to understand the value of wetlands, we need to understand ourselves really, and what it is that we depend on these systems for. So let's ask ourselves, why do we value water? How would we use water? And being in a very water-stressed country, we think of how do we look to secure these water systems? Because what does water mean for us in our everyday life? We depend on water for a number of things. We depend on it for our cattle, for our grazing, for our agriculture, for our human consumption, and for so many activities that we do on a daily basis. So in terms of what our wetlands can do, in terms of water quality and quantity, it's important to first understand, firstly, how we use water, how we interact with water, what our thinking around water is, and then we will get a better understanding of our interactions with wetlands and what they should be. This is just to touch on some of the problems that we're seeing. Now, this slide was from 2016, but we should ask ourselves, how has the situation changed from then to now? What sort of trends are we seeing? And what is the likely way forward? And what is it envisaged to look like in the next few years? So in the last year or so, I think we would all have noticed the various provinces that have been affected by rain and heavy flooding. And that has led to infrastructure being washed away, houses, livelihoods, the displacement of people, of more than 40,000 people, in fact, and looking at the loss of life. This is some of the problems that we're facing, some of the challenges that we are having, and we're still having that to date. And yet these are some of the ecosystems, goods and services that wetlands provide. So there are a number of problems that can create and exacerbate some of these problems that we're seeing. Some of them are related to the urbanization and development. Some are related to poor stormwater management. And then we also look at the water quality aspect and how we can improve our water. So wetlands serve that function of also purifying our water systems. So not just storing it and increasing the quantity of water that we have, but also improving the quality overall. And when we think of just why that's important, again, as I say, we're affected by so many human pressures, and we are in fact experiencing a huge problem with pollution at the moment. And given that this is an everyday problem, we are in need of assistance apart from formalized organizations or apart from purification. How does the environment naturally help and support in terms of the water quality improvement and that function? In terms of biodiversity, there are ecosystems that depend on this, which exist exclusively even apart from us in our human capacity. And I think that it's critical that we understand the relationship between ourselves and biodiversity value. You know, the tourism sector is one of the most important sectors, I think, in our country, and it's based predominantly on our biodiversity. As I mentioned before, wetlands are important to address the climate change aspect and what we're seeing in terms of the various problems that we've just outlined. So wetlands perform the water storage function and also the carbon storage function. And these are things that in society today, we need to start looking at alternative ways of addressing, apart from, as I said, just your normal way of doing things. And I think that's the whole reason why there's this emphasis on the critical aspect of why wetlands are important and our need to conserve these systems. So the current state of wetlands is that 50% of our natural wetlands have already been lost due to transformation. And like I said, whether that's from development or whether that's from other sectors such as agriculture, that is basically the state of our wetlands. 62% are critically endangered and 15% are in a near natural ecological condition. Here we see that although these wetland systems are threatened, as I said, critically endangered, majority of them are actually not under formal protection. And so although they are these critical systems that we depend on for a variety of aspects, we are actually not emphasizing the importance of protecting them and conserving them. And so although they're critically endangered, this is something that we need to then consider taking forward if we are to at least be able to sustain, as I said, water quantity and quality going forward. So as a contracting party to the Ramburran Convention, DFFE has, since the inception of the program in the year 2000, invested over 1.3 billion rand in the rehabilitation of approximately 1,850 wetlands across the country. Working in every province across the country, there are many wetland systems that are of critical importance as they fall within the strategic water source areas that actually receive all our water for the country. And as I indicated before, we are a water-stressed country. So this investment and this rehabilitation and restoration of wetlands is critical for conserving our water resources. Some of the areas in which the Working for Wetlands has worked in, but this is only since 2015, is indicated on this map. But if we look at the inception from the year 2000, we have worked all over the country. There are wetlands of international significance, and I've just briefly listed them here. But for any further information, I've also just attached the link to the site for Ramburran, where you can actually go on and have a more in-depth look at any particular wetland. And just to mention that DFFE has worked across all of these systems. And I think in particular, a number of them, and I'll just show you the example then of the Blessbox spread. So if you go to the site, it takes you to the various sites, and you can see that this is one particular with respect to Gauteng. And there's a number of sites, as I indicated, that the Working for Wetlands program is currently working around. For more information, you can liaise with Ketumetse around her work in the province. This is also just to indicate the Ramsar sites around the country and where DFFE is or has been doing work. And this contributes, as I say, they fall within our strategic water source areas, major waterways, and so it is of critical importance to actually conserve and manage these wetlands in a sustainable way. So one of the exciting things is that in November last year, Cape Town actually became South Africa's first city to be accredited as a Ramsar wetland city. And their focus was on protecting urban and peri-urban wetlands. And not every province has vast areas of natural areas where wetlands can be preserved. As I said, we, in our everyday lives, we're surrounded by developments and urbanization, rapid urbanization, but we've still got to be able to manage our wetlands and conserve them because they are critically important for our livelihoods. And so this was an excellent undertaking that, an achievement that they managed. So this is just an example of how all of us can strive to really, within the sector of wetland rehabilitation and restoration, look to do this work and how important it actually is. In terms of the restoration and interventions that we specifically look at as a program, is the protection and promotion of wise use. And that's broken down into compliance and enforcement. It's broken down into advocacy and education and extension support, which means that we look to rehabilitate wetlands in a sustainable way, where we are ensuring that in terms of legislation and policies that we are complying, but we also do it in terms of advocacy and outreach to communities and other sectors. In terms of restoration and rehabilitation, the interventions are focused on erosion control, which is done through a variety of hard and soft options, and bioengineering like alien clearing, revegetation, and a new and emerging theme, your floating and constructed wetlands. So just to take you through a few examples, and this is specific to Gauteng province, we implement a number of interventions, and this will just show you a few interventions. This particular intervention is using CCA poles, and it's to improve the wetland topography so that we re-wet the surrounding wetland habitat. And these are just showing before and after photographs. This is a particular intervention of a rock pack where we tried to stabilize and deactivate that headcut erosion. This is just looking at Ekangala, and this is just trying to raise your water levels. And we've done that through using the intervention of the MACMAT-R. And lastly, Colbyn, just to look at raising the water table and ensuring that there's backflooding to encourage wetland revegetation, and then also to just open up the channel so that it's no longer restricted. But these are just a few of the interventions that the program does. There are a number of interventions, and it's site-specific, but it really looks to hopefully achieve the intended purpose of trying to secure water resources in terms of water quality and quantity, and to ensure that people are then able to have a more secure livelihood because of that. So today, I thank you for having me, and I welcome any sort of engagement.
Esmeralda, thank you very much for the update. Always really good to hear what's going on, and also the visual pictures, I think, are always great. It's really fantastic to see the work that's being done. I'm just going to stop your share now quickly, that we can. I'll call for questions, but I'm going to start off with one of the questions. I'm not sure how long you've been involved in the program, but for example, Rand Water was involved from the very, very, very beginning back in 98, 2000. And the drive at that stage, like the alien vegetation clearing program, was really driven by the employment opportunities that these types of interventions created. And there was a whole massive drive in the beginning to the social aspects of the project. And I think it was well supported and things like that. But Esmeralda, in the 20 or 25 years since, how are you finding that balance between creating job opportunities for people and having all the technology and lessons that we've learned over 27 years on how to actually implement various remediation activities, that it has to have the science behind it. And sometimes science can't account for 100% employment of people. I hope you're getting an indication or an understanding of the type of question that I'm asking. So how do we balance off in the projects that are being run today with recognizing social interaction, but also the importance of using the science behind it to make sure that the interventions that are done today will be lasting?
Thanks for the question, Mark. So yes, I do understand what it is that you're trying to say, and that's a very good question indeed. You know, when I talk about this and I talk about the livelihoods, and I want to relate back as to why wetlands are important, I try to depict the value that we place on water, because water is life, and wetlands are essentially conserving and providing us with water quantity and quality. We need to make that connection because we depend on these systems. And so, you know, trying to balance those job opportunities with having a sustainable intervention being provided, that's a very critical aspect. So when we look at an area, we need to look holistically. I know there are various programs. So there's working for wetlands, there's working for water, there's working for fire, and you know there are a number of programs. But we need to look holistically at an environment and what is actually happening within that environment, within that catchment, in fact. And like I was saying, a catchment level approach has issues of rapid urbanization and stormwater management issues. And there are a number of things that would then affect wetland rehabilitation and our ability to really make progress in terms of achieving those desired standards. And what is it that the rehab seeks to address? Is there a particular issue? And so we link the science to an outcome of how is this going to improve then the water quality or quantity? How are we making that difference? And so looking at the work that's required on site, it's important to understand that we do this working together with people. And so part of our program, we develop rehabilitation plans. So it's not done exclusively. It's done with that scientific specialist input of whether you are needing engineers, of whether you are needing an ecologist, or whatever specialist expert advice you're needing to really determine whether you're doing the right thing. There's also that aspect of compliance to make sure you're abiding by legislation and policies. There's also the aspect of working now with communities, traditional authorities and other authorities at various levels of government, NGOs, whoever the stakeholders may be, to ensure that we are doing what is best for the environment and that it is sustainable and will then create jobs, if that makes sense.
Andrew, I see your hand. I'll come to you now. Yes, Esmeralda, it does. I like what you've just said by finishing off with that comment that it's not necessarily now the impetus of these projects to have an upfront directive to employ as many people as possible. You're making the longer term sustainable link to saying, if we can provide employment opportunities for a short period of time for a smaller group of people to affect a good quality rehabilitation measure to be put in place, then out of that, the greater community has the potential to enjoy the remediation impacts or effects that it would have on the greater system, potentially with more water, water security, ability to irrigate, etc. So yeah, it's good to hear. It's always been a learning curve in the program and how it evolves. So thank you for that. Andrew, if you'd like to ask your question, please, or comment.
Yeah, firstly, to add to the discussion so far, and Esmeralda, thanks for the presentation. I think it's time we used it very loudly as a fanfare and set of trumpets to get a lot of more people converted and understanding the importance of wetlands. But to add to this as sustainability, the other thought is to look at the economic goods and services that can come out of wetlands. In terms of, say, plants which could be harvested, say, for crafts, or tourism opportunities around birding and walks and things like that. So I think those are other aspects that one can look at in terms of the longer term sustainability. But I think, going back to my initial comment about fanfaring, the importance of wetlands, particularly in urban areas, and you picked up the loss that we're seeing through urban areas, is how we need to change the thinking in urban areas, particularly with developers who are looking for every square meter and fudging around corners, and actually putting a lot of professionals under pressure to actually counter some of the necessity of protecting wetlands, but not only the actual wetland, but the feed areas into those wetlands. And I think and I'm not sure how we do this, but we need to give stronger support to the professionals and to the authorities to actually recognize the importance of wetlands, the rehabilitation, the restoration, and their protection, to add value to our urban infrastructure through green infrastructure, and as an essential service to manage the water. Added to that, we also need to start looking at programs to rehabilitate any wetlands within major river systems, which we monitor with high pollution levels. And I'm particularly interested in the Klip, obviously. And we're sort of trying to work through a program now to identify those wetlands that we can start to work on and rehabilitate and restore. Because one has to recognize that the city infrastructure has failed. It's not going to be fixed in a hurry in any way. And we've got to let Mother Nature do what Mother Nature does best, clean up the water. And the wetlands is the way to do that. And if one looks at the Klip River wetland south of Joburg in between the Lido and Heineken, which WRC valued at between 140 to 180 billion rands worth of service value. How do we bring that to be? And that's certainly something which we're trying to do as CLIPSA. But we have to realize that, and we have to get the authorities actively involved. We have to get developers actively involved in recognizing that value and realizing that value